Okay, so we follow this dirt road here for about 2 miles.
Exactly. You'll see the sign with the hummingbird.
Every day, he sat by the dusty roadside, eating the same simple lunch, alone. No one noticed him. No one cared. But on this day, something different happened. A luxury truck suddenly slowed down and stopped right in front of him. Out stepped a wealthy rancher, someone powerful, someone important, someone who had no reason to even look his way. The farmhand froze. Why would someone like her stop for someone like him? What she said next didn't just surprise him, it changed his entire life forever. And trust me, you won't believe what happens after this. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a harsh light over the long stretch of dusty road that cut through the farmland. Heat rose from the ground in soft waves, making the distance shimmer. On the side of that road, sitting on a flat stone, was Daniel. He unwrapped a small cloth and revealed his lunch. 2 pieces of dry bread and a thin slice of cheese. It was the same meal he had eaten almost every day for as long as he could remember. He held the bread in his rough hands, his fingers marked with small cuts and old scars from years of hard work. Daniel did not complain. He had learned long ago that complaining changed nothing. He took a bite slowly, chewing as he looked out at the empty fields. The ranch where he worked was not far, but he chose to sit here during his break. Away from the noise. Away from the others who barely spoke to him unless they had to. A truck passed by, its wheels kicking up dust that drifted through the air and settled on his clothes. Daniel did not react. It happened all the time. People came and went, never sparing him a glance. To them, he was just another worker. Someone easy to ignore. He wiped his hands on the cloth and took another bite. There was a time when things felt different. When he believed he might become something more than a man who worked from sunrise to sunset for just enough to get by. He used to watch the ranch owners and wonder what it would be like to live without worry. To make decisions instead of taking orders. But those thoughts had faded over the years. Now, his days followed the same quiet pattern. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. A soft breeze moved across the land, offering a brief moment of relief from the heat. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, letting it pass over him. It was the only part of the day that felt kind. Then, in the distance, he heard something different. The low hum of an engine. Smooth and steady. Not like the old trucks that usually pass through. Daniel opened his eyes and looked up. A large, polished truck was approaching, its surface catching the sunlight in a way that made it stand out against the dull colors of the road. It moved slower than the others, almost as if the driver was searching for something. Daniel looked away after a moment. Vehicles like that did not stop for people like him. He returned to his lunch, brushing a bit of dust off the bread before taking another bite. But the sound of the engine grew louder. Closer. Then, without warning, it slowed to a near stop. Daniel frowned slightly and glanced up again. The truck came to a full stop right in front of him. For a brief moment, everything felt still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel straightened a little, unsure of what to do. His first instinct was to stand, but he hesitated. No one had ever stopped for him before. The door of the truck opened. A woman stepped out, her boots touching the ground with quiet confidence. Her clothes were clean, well-made, and practical, but there was no mistaking the authority in the way she carried herself. Daniel recognized her at once. She owned one of the largest ranches in the region. He lowered his gaze, suddenly aware of the dust on his clothes and the simple food in his hands. Footsteps approached him. And then, for the first time in a long while, someone stood in front of Daniel and looked at him as if he mattered. Daniel kept his eyes lowered, unsure if he should stand or remain seated. His fingers tightened slightly around the cloth in his hands. He could feel her presence in front of him, calm but firm, as if she belonged anywhere she chose to stand. "Is that all you have for lunch?" the woman asked. Her voice was steady, not unkind, but direct. Daniel glanced down at the bread and cheese, then back at the ground. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "It's enough." There was a brief silence. Not the kind that felt empty, but the kind that carried thought. Instead of walking away, she stepped closer and looked at the stone beside him. Without asking, she brushed a bit of dust away and sat down. Daniel's head lifted in surprise. No one like her had ever sat beside him before. Workers usually kept their distance, and owners never came this close. "You work nearby?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "At Turner's Ranch," he replied. She nodded once, as if confirming something in her mind. "How long have you been there?" "About 5 years." "And before that?" Daniel hesitated. "Other ranches wherever there was work." She studied him quietly. Not just his words, but the way he spoke them. Careful, measured, as if he had learned to say only what was necessary. "What do you do there?" she continued. "Whatever they need," he said. "Feeding, cleaning, repairs. Sometimes helping with the horses." At the mention of horses, something shifted slightly in his tone. It was subtle, but she noticed. "You like working with them?" she asked. Daniel gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He paused. The question seemed simple, yet it was not one he was used to answering. Most people did not ask why. They only gave orders. "They listen," he said after a moment. "Not with words, but they listen. If you are patient, they trust you." The woman leaned back slightly, considering his answer. There was no pride in his voice, no attempt to impress. Just quiet truth. "What would you do," she asked, "if you had your own place?" Daniel let out a faint breath, almost like a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I have not thought about that in a long time." "Think about it now." He looked out across the open land, his eyes narrowing slightly against the sunlight. For a moment, he seemed far away. "I would take care of the animals properly," he said. "Not rush them. Not push them too hard. I would make sure they were calm. Healthy." He stopped, as if unsure whether to continue. "And?" she asked. "That's all," he said, lowering his gaze again. "It's enough." The woman watched him closely. There was something in the way he spoke. No big dreams. No grand plans. Just a simple understanding of what mattered. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card. Holding it between her fingers, she extended it toward him. Daniel looked at it but did not take it right away. "My name is Margaret Hale," she said. "I own the Hale Ranch." "I know, ma'am," he replied softly. "Come there tomorrow morning," she continued. "Ask for me." Daniel finally took the card, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. It felt out of place in his rough hands. "For what reason?" he asked. Margaret stood up, dusting her hands lightly. "To see if what you say about trust is true." She turned and walked back toward her truck. Daniel watched as she stepped inside and closed the door. A moment later, the engine started again, and the truck pulled away, leaving a trail of dust behind. He sat there in silence, the card still in his hand. It was the first time in years that something unexpected had entered his life, and he did not know what to make of it. The next morning arrived earlier than usual for Daniel. He had barely slept. The small card Margaret had given him rested beside his bed through the night, as if it carried more weight than paper should. Before the sun had fully risen, he was already on his way. The road to the Hale Ranch was longer than the one he walked each day to work, but he did not mind. The air was cool, and the quiet of the morning gave him time to think. More than once, he considered turning back. He had no clear reason to be there. No promise of work. No guarantee of anything at all. But each time doubt crept in, he remembered her words. "You deserve a chance." By the time he reached the entrance, the sun had begun to spread light across the wide land. The ranch stretched farther than he could easily see. Strong wooden fences lined the fields. Groups of horses moved freely, their coats shining in the early light. Workers were already busy, moving with purpose. Daniel slowed his steps. Everything here felt different. Ordered. Calm. Alive in a way he had not seen before. He stood near the entrance for a moment, unsure if he should go further. His clothes were clean but worn. His boots carried the marks of years of use. He felt out of place. A passing worker gave him a quick glance, then another, longer one. "You looking for someone?" the man asked. Daniel nodded. "Margaret Hale." The worker raised his brows slightly, then pointed toward the main stable. over there." Daniel thanked him and walked on, his steps careful but steady. When he reached the stable, he saw her at once. Margaret stood near one of the enclosures, speaking with another worker. She turned as if she had sensed him. "You came," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good." Without wasting time, she gestured for him to follow. They walked past several stalls until they reached one set apart from the others. Inside stood a large stallion, dark and powerful. Its muscles shifted under its coat as it moved. Its eyes were alert, restless. "This is Orion," Margaret said. "Strong, intelligent, and difficult." The horse let out a sharp breath and struck the ground with one hoof. "No one has been able to manage him properly," she continued. "Too many have tried to control him. Too few have tried to understand him." Daniel stepped closer to the enclosure, stopping at a safe distance. He did not reach out. He did not speak. He simply watched. The stallion moved along the fence, its head high, its body tense. "What do you see?" Margaret asked. Daniel took a moment before answering. "He is not angry," he said. "He is unsure." A faint sound came from behind them. A couple of workers had gathered, watching with interest. One of them gave a quiet laugh, as if amused by the idea. Margaret ignored them. "Go on," she said. Daniel opened the gate slowly and stepped inside. The stallion reacted at once, turning sharply, its ears pinned back. It moved away, creating distance. Daniel did not follow. Instead, he stood still, his posture relaxed, his hands at his sides. He kept his gaze soft, not fixed, allowing the horse to watch him without feeling challenged. Time passed. Minutes stretched, but Daniel did not rush. He took a slow step forward, then stopped again. The stallion circled, keeping space between them, its movements tense but measured. Daniel spoke then, his voice low and even. Not commanding, not demanding, just present. "It's all right," he said quietly. The words were simple, but the tone carried something more. Another step. Another pause. The horse slowed its movement. The workers behind the fence grew silent. Daniel reached out his hand, not forcing the distance to close, but offering it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the stallion lowered its head slightly. One careful step forward. Then another. Until at last, it stood within reach. Daniel's fingers touched its neck, light and steady. The horse did not pull away. A quiet stillness settled over the space. Margaret watched without speaking, her expression thoughtful. Behind her, the workers no longer laughed. Daniel kept his hand on the horse, his movements calm, his breathing even. He had not tried to control it. He had only asked it to trust. And it had answered. In the days that followed, word spread quickly across the ranch. The new man, the quiet one who had walked in without promise or title, had done what no one else could. Orion, once restless and unapproachable, now stood calm in Daniel's presence. Some workers began to greet him with respect. Others kept their distance, watching in silence. Change had come, and not everyone welcomed it. Among them was Victor. He had worked at the ranch for years and held a position of authority. He knew the routines, the workers, and the way things had always been done. Daniel's presence unsettled him, not because of noise or defiance, but because of the quiet shift in trust. Margaret began asking for Daniel more often. She valued his judgment, especially when it came to the horses. That alone was enough to stir something bitter in Victor. One evening, after most of the workers had left, Victor remained behind. The ranch was quiet, the air still. It was the kind of silence that made even small sounds feel louder than they were. He moved through the stables with purpose, stopping at a few gates. One by one, he loosened the latches just enough. Not open, not obvious, just enough. Then he left. It did not take long. A sudden noise broke through the calm. The sharp sound of hooves against wood. A gate shifting. Then another. By the time the workers returned, several horses had moved out of their enclosures, restless and unsettled. The order of the ranch had been broken. Margaret arrived soon after, her expression firm as she took in the scene. "What happened?" she asked. Victor stepped forward before anyone else could answer. "It started near the far stable," he said. "The new handling methods may have caused confusion." His words were careful. Not an accusation, but close enough. Margaret turned her gaze toward Daniel. He stood near one of the horses, guiding it back calmly, his movements steady despite the tension around him. "I did not leave any gate open," Daniel said. His voice was quiet, but clear. Victor crossed his arms slightly. "No one is saying you did it on purpose," he replied. "But changes can have consequences." For a moment, doubt settled over the space. Not loud, not spoken, but present. Then a young stable boy stepped forward, his face uncertain but determined. "I saw him," the boy said, pointing toward Victor. The air shifted. "He was here after everyone left," the boy continued. "Near the gates." Silence followed. Margaret's eyes moved from the boy to Victor. There was no anger in her expression. Only clarity. Victor did not speak. He did not need to. The truth had already been seen. "Gather your things," Margaret said at last. Her voice was calm, but final. Victor lowered his gaze, then turned and walked away without a word. The workers stood still, absorbing what had just happened. Margaret looked back at Daniel. For a brief moment, something softened in her expression. "You stood your ground," she said, "even when it would have been easier not to." Daniel gave a small nod. He had not defended himself with force, only with truth. And it had been enough. Time moved forward, steady and quiet, much like Daniel himself. The ranch began to change in small but lasting ways. The horses grew calmer. The work felt less strained. Even the air seemed different, as if the land had settled into a better rhythm. Daniel became a trusted part of it all. He was not loud. He did not give orders unless needed. But people began to listen when he spoke. They watched how he worked, how he handled even the most difficult tasks with patience. Margaret noticed everything. One morning, she called him to the same place where they had first spoken about Orion. The horse now stood at ease, its once restless energy replaced with quiet strength. "You have done more here than I expected," she said. Daniel said nothing. He was not used to praise. "This ranch needed change," she continued. "Not just in the work, but in the way things are understood." She paused, then added, "I would like you to stay. Not as a worker who follows orders, but as someone who helps shape what this place becomes." Daniel looked at her, unsure at first. "You mean, a permanent position?" "More than that," she said. "A role with responsibility. A voice that matters." For a moment, he could not respond. Not because he doubted her words, but because he had never expected to hear them. "I will do my best," he said at last. "I know," Margaret replied. Later that day, Daniel found himself once again sitting by the roadside during a short break. The same place. The same quiet stretch of land. But it no longer felt the same. A young worker sat nearby, unwrapping a simple meal. Daniel glanced at him, then reached into his own cloth and shared what he had. No words were needed, because he remembered what it felt like to be unseen. And he would not let someone else feel that way again. As the sun slowly set over the quiet fields, one simple truth remained. Sometimes, life changes not because of luck, but because someone chose to stop, to notice, and to give a chance. Daniel was once invisible to the world. Just another worker on the side of the road. But all it took was one moment, one decision, to change everything. And it makes you wonder, how many people around us are waiting for that same chance? How many stories go unnoticed every single day? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if you had the power to change someone's life with just one decision? Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss more powerful and inspiring stories like this. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can create the biggest change.